That year was 2026. The location, deep in the San Bernardino Mountains of California, inside a Desert Thunder military history museum converted from a Class B fallout shelter built in 1943 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I still remember every detail of that stormy night, not because I want to, but because ever since then, it feels like something permanently rewired my nervous system. My name is Mark Hammond, former sergeant in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. After I got out, I spent a year and a half working as the night security supervisor at the museum. If you asked me why I left the battlefield in Iraq only to bury myself in an underground concrete coffin working night shifts, I'd probably tell you it was because I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere to filter out the noise in my head from the real war. But I was wrong. Some noises don't come from the battlefield. They come from somewhere deeper underground, somewhere older. April 18th, 2026. That afternoon felt like July in the Mojave Desert, the temperature spiking to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. By 6 in the evening, the sky started to turn the wrong color, that sickly green-yellow I'd only seen once before, in Fallujah, right before a massive sandstorm rolled in. At 3:47 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a special alert. The wording was official, but the message underneath it was terrifying. A rare, rapidly intensifying extreme convective storm system is moving towards San Bernardino County. Winds are expected to exceed 85 miles per hour, accompanied by ping-pong ball-sized hail and extreme rainfall capable of triggering flash floods. All non-essential personnel are advised to seek sturdy shelter immediately. I was in the museum's main exhibition hall at the time, checking the nighttime humidity sensors on a World War II Sherman tank. My phone rang 3 times. All calls from my wife at home. I didn't pick up the third time, because at 5:15 p.m., Director Jenkins made a decision that still makes me feel like an idiot when I think back on it. All daytime staff and visitors were ordered to evacuate before the storm fully hit, but the security team had to stay. The reasoning was that the bunker-turned-building itself was the most structurally secure extreme weather shelter in the area, and that the museum was housing a collection of Normandy landing artifacts on loan from a private collector, valued at over $4 million, which couldn't be moved. So I stayed, along with 3 others: Elena Vasquez, a 22-year-old former Marine Corps corporal; Robert Bob Hicks, 38, a former Army National Guard driver; and Kevin Lee, a 19-year-old intern on his very first day. We were ordered to remain behind, to guard a tomb built out of the remains of war, in the middle of a storm. You know, in the military we say, the first casualty on the battlefield is the plan, but when you spend a stormy night inside a museum converted from a World War II bunker, you start to realize something even more unsettling. The boundaries of a battlefield are never defined by concrete. The wall between reality and illusion is a lot thinner than we think. Most history books describe war as a series of measurable actions, casualty counts, distance advanced, ammunition expended. But anyone who's actually been there will tell you that war isn't about numbers. It's a slow, relentless erosion of your basic perception of reality. You start to wonder whether that distant sound is a mortar round or your own heartbeat. You start to question whether the moving shadow is an enemy, or just your own exhaustion playing tricks on you. And that night, inside that concrete coffin cut off from the outside world by the storm, the 4 of us were forced to confront a question no field manual has ever answered. If some wars never truly end, if certain sounds and footsteps just change frequency and keep going, then how do you even define reality? Let me start from the beginning. The museum's core structure was a bunker designated Beta 6, built in 1943 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in anticipation of possible air raids on the West Coast. The main corridor was an arched concrete tunnel about 400 feet long and 30 feet wide, buried 40 feet underground. It was originally designed to house a company-level command post and a field hospital. After the war, the facility sat abandoned for nearly 50 years until a private foundation funded its conversion into a military history museum in 2004. During the renovation, almost all of the bunker's original structural features were preserved: the steel reinforcement ribs spaced every 20 feet, the rusted ventilation ducts, the faint stenciled supply classification markings from the World War II era still visible on the walls. The thing that disturbed me most, looking back, was the airtight door at the far eastern end of the main corridor. That door weighed 2 tons. It had been designed to withstand chemical weapon attacks, with an internal crank-operated manual locking mechanism. When the bunker was converted into a museum, the door was permanently fixed in the open position as part of the exhibit. But that night, when I passed it for the second time, I found it closed. Closing that door would have required the equivalent of an adult man applying about 60 foot-pounds of torque, turning that rusted crank at least 20 times. It was impossible, unless something on the other side needed it shut. Back to the storm. At 6:45 p.m., the first drops of rain started hammering the roof of the museum's surface structure. And I don't mean normal rain. These drops, driven by the wind, sounded like someone dumping an entire truckload of marble pellets onto a metal roof. The four of us had gathered in the duty room midway down the main corridor, what used to be the bunker's communications center. The old telephone switchboard was still mounted on the wall. At 6:52, the power flickered for the first time. The lights blinked 3 times, then stabilized. Bob was the only one who seemed uneasy. He was 7 years older than me, had driven Humvee convoys in the National Guard, and seen northern Iraq in the winter of 2003. Normally quiet, but when he spoke, every word came out like a solid slug of lead forced through clenched teeth. "I've seen weather like this," he said. "On the Kuwait border. That's not a normal thunderstorm. That's somebody using weather as a weapon." We all thought he was joking. Bob never joked. By 7:20 p.m., the storm had reached full fury. I stood at the doorway of the duty room, looking down the 400-foot corridor toward the distant entrance hall. All I could see was a sheet of mist, dyed dark red by the emergency lighting. Water had already started seeping in through several of the old ventilation shafts, forming a thin reflective film across the floor. At 7:31, the main power cut out completely. The museum's backup system was a diesel generator housed in a separate machine room on the west side of the bunker. In theory, it should have kicked in within 15 seconds. That night, it took nearly 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes of darkness, we heard it for the first time. The sound didn't come from the corridor. It came from inside the walls. A low-frequency, rhythmic hum, somewhere between 40 and 60 hertz. It sounded like the resonance of heavy machinery, but there were no machines running anywhere in that bunker. Elena was the first to notice the pattern. It wasn't continuous. It came every 22 seconds, lasted about 8 seconds, then stopped. She switched on her handheld tactical flashlight, the beam sweeping across the rusted steel ribs lining the corridor walls. Their shadows stretched out like prison bars. She said something that, to this day, I regret not taking seriously. "I've heard this before. At the CQB training facility in Camp Pendleton, they use that frequency to simulate." She stopped herself. Later, I found out what she had been about to say. In close-quarters battle training, the military uses low-frequency acoustic devices to simulate ground resonance caused by approaching hostile personnel. That kind of resonance doesn't come from machines. It comes from footsteps. Not one set of footsteps. Many. The backup power finally kicked in at 7:35 p.m. But that's when the real problem surfaced. The generator could only support about 40% of the lighting circuits. Before evacuating, Director Jenkins had explained why. During the renovation, the museum had preserved its historical authenticity by keeping most of the original style incandescent bulbs and fluorescent tubes. The combined load was simply too much for the generator. So the emergency power distribution followed a strict priority. 1 out of every 3 lights in the main corridor stayed on. The duty room was fully lit, and the dehumidifier in the eastern exhibit wing remained operational, because that's where the paper artifacts were stored. Everything else, the World War II Infantry Equipment Hall on the west side, the Pacific Theater, immersive exhibit to the north, and the eastern branch corridor leading to the old airtight door, fell into darkness. That meant more than half of the museum's 42,000 square feet was completely dark. And in military terms, darkness is never a passive condition. Darkness is the enemy's first line of defense. We sent our first situation report, formatted as a sitrep, to Jenkins, who had already evacuated to a safe zone. But around 7:40 p.m., communications went down completely. Not because of equipment failure. The storm itself was generating electromagnetic interference so intense that every radio channel dissolved into meaningless static shrieking. We were cut off. Bob suggested we switch to a rear area patrol protocol, a full sweep of the entire facility every 40 minutes, in teams of 2. Each team would carry a handheld tactical radio, a backup power pack, and an M9 bayonet, The museum's security policy prohibited firearms, and the bayonet, taken from the exhibit, was the only non-lethal defensive tool we were allowed to use. I agreed. The first patrol was mine, paired with Kevin, starting at 7:50 p.m. The route was straightforward: leave the duty room, head west along the main corridor to check the Western Exhibit Hall, double back past the duty room, continue east to inspect the branch corridor and the airtight door, then pass through the Pacific Theater exhibit and return. About 25 minutes total. I still remember every sensory detail of that walk with Kevin. Not because I have a great memory, but because that patrol was the last time my nervous system operated in what I would call normal mode. After that, it felt like my perception had been tuned to a different frequency. When we left the duty room, Elena was checking the generator monitoring panel. The green indicators glowed in the dark like the eyes of some deep-sea creature. Bob was sitting in a folding chair, holding himself in a posture I'd never seen before. His arms weren't crossed. His hands were gripping his own biceps tightly, like he was applying pressure just to stay grounded. I thought he was cold. The first stretch of the main corridor, about 150 feet west of the duty room, had the best lighting. 1 in every 3 fixtures was on. The old fluorescent tubes cast a pale, sickly light, with a faint, constant hum. But when we passed the entrance to the Western Exhibit Hall, the lighting dropped to 1 in every 6 fixtures. The Western Hall was the least presentable part of the museum. It displayed World War II infantry equipment, American and German, uniforms, helmets, field boots, canteens, mess kits, bayonets, holsters, and what I still think is a particularly cruel coincidence, a glass case holding 17 different models of German bayonets. The ceiling there was about 3 feet lower than the main corridor, because another level of the bunker sat above it. Several exposed ventilation ducts ran along the ceiling. One of them, under the pressure of the storm, emitted a continuous groan, like metal fatigue about to give way. Kevin was about 8 feet ahead of me. His flashlight beam moved between the glass cases, their reflections making it look like he was walking through a maze of mirrors. Then he stopped. I asked what was wrong. He didn't turn around. He just said quietly, too calmly for my liking, "Do you smell that?" I stopped. At first, I didn't smell anything. Then, maybe 3 or 4 seconds later, it was like my sense of smell suddenly reconnected to a circuit that had been offline for years. The scent went from faint to overwhelming almost instantly, not like a natural diffusion, more like a switch being flipped. It's hard to describe. If you've never been to war, you may never have encountered it. It was the almond-like scent of heated C4 explosive, mixed with sweat, mothballs embedded in wool uniforms, and something else, something sweet and cloying, like spoiled honey. But what terrified me most wasn't the smell itself. It was how fast my brain processed it, before I consciously registered it as strange. My body had already reacted. My heart rate spiked from 72 to 134 beats per minute. My pupils dilated despite the flashlight glare, and my right hand, the one not holding the light, moved on its own, reaching for the bayonet sheath at my waist. That wasn't thought. That was muscle memory. A conditioned reflex I'd learned in Iraq, one I thought I'd left behind. That smell meant one thing: enemy infantry, seconds away from a close-range ambush. Kevin turned to look at me. His flashlight hit my face, blinding me, but in that split second I saw his expression. It wasn't the look of an intern reacting to something weird. It was the look of a soldier checking whether another soldier had just sensed the same thing, the kind of signal that strips away judgment. What had he heard? I didn't get the chance to ask. Every light in the Western Hall went out at once. Not flickering, not dimming, just gone, as if someone had cut the entire circuit. At the same time, the low-frequency hum from inside the walls stopped abruptly. Not fading, cut off, like a throat being squeezed shut. All that remained was the storm, its low, earth-deep roar filtering through 40 feet of rock and soil, and our breathing. I ordered Kevin to switch on his backup headlamp. He said it wouldn't turn on. I told him to check the batteries. He said he had. They were full. The light just didn't work. I handed him my spare flashlight. And that's when I heard it. It didn't come from the walls. It didn't come from the ventilation ducts. It came from behind us, about 50 feet back, near the passage where the main corridor connected to the Western Hall. Footsteps. But not normal footsteps. On concrete, footsteps should sound sharp, echoing, spaced about half a second to 0.8 apart, depending on pace. That's not what I heard. Each step landed at perfectly identical intervals, precise, like measured by a metronome, exactly 1-2 seconds apart. And it wasn't one pair of boots. It was at least 12, maybe 15 pairs, every step landing in perfect unison. It sounded like a single person walking, but that was impossible. No single person's footsteps have that kind of width. That acoustic spread only comes from a formation, at least 5 men across. I'd marched in at least 40 battalion-level parades with the 82nd Airborne. I know what a platoon sounds like when it marches in step across concrete. This was identical, except for one thing. In a real formation you hear other sounds, commands, gear clanking, fabric shifting. Behind me, there was nothing but footsteps. Not even breathing. I told myself not to turn around. Kevin already had. His flashlight beam cut into the darkness behind us, but about 30 feet out, the light didn't fade. It just disappeared, as if something absorbed it. "Sir," he said, his voice no longer steady, "the light just vanishes out there." He called me "Sir." In the military, when a subordinate uses "sir" in a non-formal setting, it means two things. He's strictly following engagement protocol, and he's very afraid. I didn't move. I calculated. Based on the volume and spread of the footsteps, if it was a marching unit, they were about 50 to 60 feet away. At a 1-2 second step interval and standard marching speed, they'd reach us in about 10 seconds. I had 10 seconds to decide. I didn't get 10. At the 8th second, the footsteps stopped. Not fading, not turning, just stopped. As if the formation had dissolved in the darkness behind me. Then, from farther away, from deeper inside the bunker, from the direction of the eastern branch corridor, came a new sound. An air raid siren. But not the kind you hear in movies. The rising and falling wail of British World War II sirens. This was different. A mechanical, hand-crank siren. A metal cylinder with a handle. A single-tone sound, but with a harsh, grinding edge like rusted gears being forced to turn. In U.S. military terminology it's called a mechanical air raid siren. During World War II, these were installed at every base and critical facility. A person would stand beside it and crank the handle, spinning an internal rotor at high speed. Air would compress and release through apertures, producing that piercing sound, loud enough to make your scalp crawl from 2 miles away. That was the sound I heard, and it wasn't distant. It wasn't coming from the storm above ground. It was coming from the other side of that 2-ton airtight door, the one that had been permanently fixed open, and was now closed. That door was about 200 feet away, at the far end of the eastern branch corridor. Kevin started shaking. Not metaphorically, physically. His flashlight beam jittered across the floor, tracing an expanding, irregular oval because he could no longer steady his hand. I grabbed his shoulder, turned him toward the duty room, and ordered him to go back immediately, find Bob and Elena, and have them meet me at the entrance to the eastern corridor. He asked where I was going. I said I was going to check the airtight door. He said something I will never forget. "Sir, that door is closed. That door can't close by itself." "I know," I said. Then I started walking west. No, not west, east, toward the eastern branch corridor. Let me give you a military definition of fear, one you won't find in any field manual, but every combat veteran will tell you it's true. Fear isn't your instinctive reaction to danger, that's alertness. Fear is what happens when all your senses are telling you there is a lethal threat ahead, while your rational mind is telling you that's physically impossible. The short circuit between those two signals, that spark, is fear. When I walked toward the eastern corridor, my body was in that exact state of short circuit. My legs moved normally. My breathing was steady. My heart rate had settled into a high but manageable rhythm. But deep in my brain, the part responsible for answering, "Is this real?" had shut down completely. Not because I believed nothing was there, but because I couldn't process both. The footsteps are real, and the footsteps cannot exist at the same time. So I shut that part off, and let my body run on the most primitive layer of reflex, the kind that doesn't require reality to be verified. We call that autopilot. On the battlefield, autopilot is what keeps you alive in the first 5 seconds after an IED goes off. But that night, autopilot took me somewhere no battlefield ever could. By the time I reached the entrance to the eastern branch corridor, Bob and Elena were already there. Kevin had arrived before me and was giving Bob a fast, low-voiced report, his speech tight with clenched teeth. Elena stood about 10 feet behind them. Something about her posture was wrong. I knew Elena. She was one of the calmest people I'd ever met. In the Marine Corps, she'd been a combat engineer, specializing in IED disposal, the kind of work that demands a steadiness of hand even neurosurgeons would envy. But now, the way she held her tactical flashlight wasn't just gripping it, she was clamping down on it. Her knuckles were completely white, her fingers locked around the metal body like she needed that solid object just to confirm her hands were still there. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring down the corridor. I followed her gaze. The Eastern Branch corridor was about 120 feet long and 8 feet wide, a straight concrete passage with no turns or intersections. Under normal conditions, shining a flashlight from the entrance would let you clearly see the airtight door at the far end, the crank handle, the massive hinges. That night, my beam, a Phoenix PD-36R rated for a 300-meter throw, only traveled about 70 feet before it vanished. Not blocked, just gone. The light itself decayed in a way that made no physical sense, as if the air in the corridor had become denser, or more precisely, as if the light transmission coefficient of that space had been altered by something. But the light wasn't the worst part. The sound was. From deep inside the corridor, from the direction of the airtight door, I could hear water, not dripping, moving, a large volume of it, shifting, like someone dragging a waterlogged canvas hose across concrete, or like something massive and soaked was slowly crawling along the floor. And over it, cutting through everything, was the hand-cranked air raid siren. It wasn't continuous anymore. It came in bursts, uneven, intermittent, like whoever was turning the crank, if it even was a person, kept stopping and starting. Every time it sounded, I felt a sharp, needle-like pain at the roots of my teeth. That wasn't psychological. That was resonance. Sound waves at a frequency interacting with bone. At certain frequencies, medical studies show direct stimulation of nerve endings inside the tooth pulp. In other words, that sound wasn't just a warning. It was designed to hurt. Bob finally spoke. His voice was low, almost to himself. I saw something like this in Kuwait. We all looked at him. He didn't look at us. His eyes stayed fixed on the corridor. 2003. Our convoy broke down near the highway of death. 4 of us stayed behind with the Humvee, waiting for a tow. After dark, we saw lights coming toward us, not a single point, but a line, like headlights stretching across the horizon. We radioed ahead, asked if any unit was moving toward us. They said no. The lights got closer. We heard engines, but the sound was wrong. Not diesel. It sounded like, I don't know, like someone imitating an engine with their voice, but too perfectly. Perfect enough to feel wrong. When it got within 200 meters, all 4 of us saw it. It wasn't a convoy. It was light, shaped like vehicles, but cold. No heat. One of our guys, Smith, started walking toward it. Not because he wanted to. His body just went. Me and another guy tackled him, pinned him down. He fought us for about 2 minutes, stronger than he should have been. Then the lights disappeared. The sound cut out at the same time, like someone turned off a TV. Smith didn't remember anything afterward, but his eyes, there was something in his eyes. Something you couldn't see, but you could feel. He didn't lose his memory. He'd been looked at, from the inside. When Bob finished, the sound of water in the corridor stopped. The siren stopped too. Then something else came from the darkness. A voice. Not footsteps. Not machinery. Not the storm. A human voice. A man's voice. It wasn't English, or any language I could recognize. But the tone, the rhythm, the breathing pattern, it matched exactly the way a person sounds when they give the command. Follow me. Not, come here. Not, over here. Follow me. An invitation. A command. Something that didn't allow refusal, and at the same time made your stomach turn. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then the corridor fell into a silence thicker than anything before. Not the absence of sound. Something was absorbing it. Even our breathing, even my own heartbeat, which I know I could hear, was swallowed. It was like the corridor itself had become a giant ear, listening. Elena moved first. She handed her flashlight to Kevin, then started walking forward. Not running, not charging, just a steady, deliberate pace, into the corridor. She didn't look back. I called her name. No response. Bob called her name. Nothing. She walked about 15 feet in, crossing into the corridor's threshold. Her outline began to distort in the light, not because of distance, but because the air itself seemed to warp, like heat shimmer. Except it wasn't heat. It was as if the refractive index of the air had been altered. I lunged forward and grabbed her shoulder. When she turned to look at me, I almost let go. Her pupils were blown wide, so large I could barely see the iris. But her expression wasn't fear, not confusion. It was something else, an intense, almost reverent focus. Her lips were moving. No sound came out. I watched her mouth form the same word again and again. It took me about 3 seconds to understand it. They're marching. I pulled her back with everything I had. She felt heavier than she should have, far heavier than her actual weight, like something extra was attached to her. Bob grabbed her from the other side, and together we dragged her back out of the corridor's threshold. The moment she crossed back, her body jerked, like she'd been hit with cold water. Her pupils began to normalize. Her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, slowed. The first thing she said was, "The water in there, it's not leaking from the ceiling. It's coming from under the door. But it's not rainwater. The smell is wrong." "What does it smell like?" I asked. "Seawater," she said. "It smells like the ocean, but we're in the desert, at least 80 miles from the Pacific." And then the door made a sound. Metal grinding against metal. Sharp, slow, lasting about 5 seconds. Like something on the other side was trying to turn the rusted crank. Then the door started to move, not opening, not closing, vibrating. That 2-ton steel airtight door began to oscillate at a high frequency, 5 to 6 cycles per second. Ripples spread across its surface, visible to the naked eye. Something was hitting it, not once, not randomly, repeatedly, uniformly, like an entire line of bodies slamming into it from the other side, all at the same time. Every impact landed on the same precise rhythm, the same rhythm we'd heard before. 1.2 seconds between each strike. Kevin started crying. Not loud sobbing, more like the kind adults try to suppress but can't, something forced up from deep in the throat, mixed with breath and fluid. He dropped his flashlight. The beam swung up to the ceiling, casting a trembling circle of light across the steel ribs overhead. Bob crouched, picked it up, and then did something I still don't understand. He turned off every light. His, mine, Elena's. We were swallowed by complete darkness. Not hard to see darkness, absolute, physical darkness. The kind where you can't even see your own hand pressed against your face. I heard Bob speak in the dark. His voice was unnervingly calm. "Don't shine light on it. Some things, if you light them up, they come alive." In Kuwait, when Smith walked toward that light, I realized something later. It wasn't that Smith was drawn to it. The light needed Smith. It needed someone to see it so it could come from there to here. So don't look, don't listen. Close your eyes. Cover your ears. Count your heartbeat. Count to 200. We stood there for, I don't know how long. I counted to 347, because I lost track, started over, lost track again. The storm began to fade. Not gradually, at one precise moment, like someone turned a dial from 10 down to 3. Then the vibration in the corridor stopped. Then the smell of seawater faded, replaced by the bunker's usual dry, stale scent, rust and concrete dust. I turned my flashlight back on. I broke Bob's rule, but I thought whatever it was had left. The beam lit the corridor. The airtight door was back where it had always been, fixed open, wide open. I could see into the storage area beyond, old shelving units, wooden crates. The floor was dry. No seawater, no residue, no trace that any liquid had ever been there. I walked inside, sweeping the light across every corner. Dust on the shelves was undisturbed. The labels on the crates, printed in 2008, were faded but intact. Everything was normal. That was the most abnormal part. The 4 of us sat in the duty room until dawn. No one spoke. Elena wrote nonstop in the duty log for about 40 minutes, fast, almost frantically. Then she stopped, stared at the pages, and slowly tore them out one by one, slipping them into her pocket. Morning came. The storm passed. Roads were cleared. Day's staff arrived. Director Jenkins showed up at 8:15 a.m. We gave him a full verbal report. He listened to everything. No laughter, no skepticism. Just silence. Then he said one sentence. "I'll handle it." That afternoon, he called me into his office. The board had decided to restructure the night shift. All 4 of us were being reassigned immediately, to daytime administrative or inventory roles. He said it wasn't punishment, and not disbelief, it was to prevent future mental health incidents. The board believed extreme weather and prolonged night shifts could trigger collective hallucinations. He assured me we'd receive clean recommendations if we left. I accepted. Elena quit 3 days later. She moved to Oregon and never worked in security or anything military-related again. Bob lasted 2 months. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, he didn't show up. His phone was disconnected. Mail sent to his house came back stamped. No such address. Kevin left 5 days after the storm. He left a handwritten resignation note on the desk. I need to spend some time with my mom. I tried to contact him later. His number was gone. All his social media accounts were deleted. As for me, I stayed another 4 months, working daytime inventory. I left every day at exactly 5 p.m. Never stepped inside that building after sunset. Then I quit, moved to Arizona, took a job with a private security company doing remote monitoring, sitting in a windowless room, watching 40 surveillance screens, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I chose the night shift. Not because I like the dark. Because I wanted to prove something. I wanted to prove that what happened that night was because of that place, that storm, that specific set of conditions, not because of me. That somewhere else, somewhere without history, nothing would happen. So far, nothing has. But every night, when one of those screens flickers, even briefly, even irrationally, my right hand still moves toward my waist, reaching for a bayonet that isn't there anymore. Years later, I saw a post on a veterans forum. No username, no location, just one line. Has anyone ever worked a night shift in that bunker in San Bernardino? There was only one reply, from an account created in 2019. It said, "Brother, that's not a bunker. It's an entrance." The reply was deleted after 24 hours. The entire thread disappeared after 48. I took a screenshot. A few months later, my hard drive failed. The data recovery technician told me everything on it had been irreversibly damaged by a strong magnetic field. He said that kind of damage pattern usually only happens when a drive is exposed to an industrial-grade electromagnetic pulse. Not household electronics. Not lightning. Something stronger. I don't know what the 4 of us experienced that night. I'm not someone who believes in the supernatural easily. My training taught me that if you hear footsteps but see no one, your auditory system is misfiring. If you smell C4 but find no explosives, your olfactory nerves are lying. If you see a door closed that couldn't have closed, your memory is betraying you. But my training never told me what to call it when all those errors happen at once, across 4 different people, in the same place, within the same precise window of time, and when our heart rates, breathing patterns, pupil responses, and after-action reports all match. My training never told me whether a place, if its history is long enough, bloody enough, silent enough, can learn to breathe. I've asked myself the same question at least 1,000 times since April 18, 2026. If we hadn't turned on those flashlights, if Bob had kept us in the dark from the beginning, if we hadn't walked toward that corridor, would the doors still have vibrated? Would the sirens still have sounded? Would the footsteps still have come? Or did it never matter whether we saw it at all? Was it just moving along its own route, in its own time, following the path of its own war, towards some end we can't understand, and we just happened to be standing in its way? I don't know the answer, but I do know this. There's a display case in that bunker-turned-museum that was never opened to the public. It's in the deepest part of the Western exhibit hall, hidden behind a black curtain with a faded sign that says, "Exhibit under maintenance." I slipped behind that curtain once, during the day, when no one was looking. There was only one item inside. A hand-cranked air raid siren. The exact model issued to U.S. Army engineers in 1943. Its metal surface was corroded, covered in verdigris and rust, like it had been buried underground for decades before being dug up. But the crank, the handle used to operate it, was brand new. No rust. No wear. Like it had been installed yesterday. And it had been locked from the inside of the display case.